Hi, everyone. We're really excited to be here with you. I am so honored to be here with the amazing Coty Raven Morris. So real quick for the seminar that we're in right now, I'm going to share a little bit of the structure with you, and then we're going to get into some more introductions so that you can learn more about Coty and myself. So first, as you heard from Sarah, make sure that if at any point you have questions that you put them in the chat, and then you can upvote each other's. We're going to talk a bit about ourselves and why it is that we are here talking about well-being with you. And then we're going to talk about some of the basic principles of what is well-being. How do you identify well-being for your students? What might be some of the common barriers for students in their effort to be well? And then some teaching practices that can help cultivate well-being. And one of them will be an activity that you can take with you into your classroom so that you and your students can do some activities together that allows you the opportunity to learn about them, learn with them, and then them learn from you as well. Followed by the Q&A. We're going to try to make as much time as we can for Q&A, and then at the end you will get a feedback survey so that we can send you your certificate. So Coty, I want to highlight you. I think that I've known you now for about a year, and I have just immensely treasured all of our time together. I want to introduce you as the host of our professional development series on music for well-being. So it is an honor to have you here talking with us about the role of well-being in teaching and also as a person. And I think for everyone that is here in our audience, one thing that we would like you to know as we go into this is that we are talking to you as teachers and educators, as researchers and scholars, but also as former children and as young people. So this is a perspective that I think can be missing in conversations about students when they're not part of the conversation with us. So we will be bringing some of that in today through our own personal reflections. And so I'm going to give the mic back over to Coty. And if you want to review some of what we've got here on the screen about you, the Hinckley Assistant Professor of Choir, Music Education, and Social Justice, the amazing Coty Raven Morris.
You better stop it. Hey, everyone. Nice to chat again. Learning my connection and my background will actually tee us right back up to why I love working with music workshops so much and what brought me here. So I was born on a Tuesday at 7:26 p.m. in New Orleans, Louisiana. And one of the many tales that I like to tell when I'm engaging with educators is that my background in music came from the social interactions that I had in church, growing up Southern Baptist and learning music, by ear in that sector. In a world where music was not part of the school climate, everybody in Louisiana, everyone in New Orleans, you just sang in proximity. You either sang in jazz groups, you sang in second line bands, or you sang in church. That's pretty much what it was. And then eventually you stop doing that because there's nothing productive that can come from music. But we know that trope is rooted in either imposter syndrome of the educator or the person or the family member, or rooted in the limitations of of the imagination of what art can do. Ever since I was a kiddo, whether it be in my family makeup or in school, music has been a massive part of my life. And everywhere that I have traveled out of this country and mostly around the United States has been because I was involved with choir. And so the access that music has given me is beyond just the ability to travel. It's the access to engaging with myself and understanding and being able to process the experiences that I've had, which brings you to this job title that I have here at Portland State, where I'm the professor of choir, where I make the music. I teach the future teachers. And then there's this aspect of social justice. And I truly believe that social justice is the way that we engage amongst each other, those fundamental hello, good morning, good afternoon, the ways that we connect, and that is something that we have put as the cherry on the icing of the cake when it really is the batter. It's the foundation of how we engage. So by working here at Portland State, it gives me the opportunity to share those philosophies through a series of mediums. I'm a composer. I am a author. You see the image of When I Grow Up, which was my first children's book. Second book on deck, where fingers crossed for this summer, that will find its way out into the planet. And my latest piece is actually coming out this October as part of the Yale Next Works projects, and it's called Dancing Leaves. And whether it be that tune and that poem that highlights the childlike wonder, as Giuliana was saying, the childlike wonder of remembering that before we were people who hyper-focused on problems, we were people who danced underneath leaves, and we snapped branches and listened to the music that they made. Whether it's that tune, whether it's Who I Want to Be, which is a tune with Briley Publishing, that is all about I lead with my spirit, keeping love in the circle around me. I'm using these mediums to teach wellness through artistic means. And yet I was like, I gotta find my way in more classrooms. There has to be a way that I could share this philosophy in more classrooms, and insert music workshop, insert Giuliana Conti reaching out to me and saying, I think we should collaborate together. And I read the fine print of what Music Workshop was doing, and that they were not here to replace teachers, but to give teachers the tools that we are all hunting down for on a sub day, when really we're trying to find a way to integrate it into our classrooms from the beginning, and not have it be sub work, and not have it be something that red flags a principal or administrators. I think a big element of my transition to college was being in a high school program in which I loved my students, but I felt like I was fighting administration because they were having visceral reactions to terms like social emotional learning, culturally relevant teaching, the same things that we have throughout time rebranded in order to engage with as many students as possible and teach students about other cultures other than their own, right? And I needed to find a way to make that connection with more people. So that's what brings me here today. Did I do it, Giuliana? Did I do the breakdown?
You did great. Can you tell
Thank
me
you.
a little bit about Being Human Together and why you started that and what it
I sure
is?
can. Being Human Together is really first and foremost a mindset and a mission statement. My teaching philosophy is that it's my life's purpose to touch as many lives through the vehicle of music. The mission statement of Being Human Together is utilizing music education, comma, Being Human Together is an organization that seeks to engage listeners in difficult topics, including social emotional learning, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's really just a practice. Just like we can't have a tantrum when we don't get the interval right when we sing the song. We don't get to have a panic when we're reading a book and reading literacy left to right. So why is it that we panic when we engage with each other about our different cultures? Why is it that we engage in things turn into big volcanic conflicts when we engage with our interactions with each other, with conversations about gender, or the things that come up when we read poetry or find these things in a class? I believe it finds itself in a point of conflict because we don't practice celebrating each other in the first place. We don't practice using language to address those things up front. For example, talking to a young person at summer camp, and an activity that I have that will likely come up in this workshop of how I ask students for pronouns. But I'm a human with a lot of stuff on my plate. Like I legit just finished choir auditions, and then we'll make copies later. So I pass out my index cards to greet my students, and I forget to ask for pronouns. And one of my students raised their hand and said, well, if you don't ask right now, how will you ever know what their pronouns are? And I said, well, I hope that we can also practice that if I try and make a mistake, that we have a rapport where you will correct me. I will digest the change. I will apologize, digest the change, and then I'll try something else. Because that's called conversation. But we live in a world where people move so fast that we don't practice conversations, so we don't know what to do when we make mistakes. And I really do believe we have to just literally practice talking to each other and making sure that the conversations about backgrounds, culture, ethnicity, the languages we speak, what discipline looks like in our classroom, what behavior corrections, what praise looks like. As someone from a Southern community, it's not just the color of my skin, but the fact that I'm a Southerner, we talk loud. So noticing how the Midwest folk, when I was at Michigan State for grad school, how they react to Southern volume, that's not rooted in racism. That is a ignorance and lack of understanding of cultures, of backgrounds. We have to learn each other and be patient enough to learn each other in order to engage and expand all of our learning.
And I love that Sarah appreciates that because she's from the South and she must totally understand about the loudness.
Yeah, I'm Southern too, so I'll feel you.
And we get so close to each other's spaces. You never know. When I came back from grad school and someone talked to me, I was like, why? How'd you get here?
But that's part of the cultural exchange, I think, that we're talking about here as teachers. We we interact with students from many different identities and backgrounds and intersectionalities. And whether you teach music, language arts, history, math, social studies, it can be challenging to know how to support such a diverse population of students. And one of the elements of your personality and identity that I've really come to cherish is your vulnerability and your honesty as a teacher about what your challenges have been, how you worked through them, the role that music has played in that. And that's something that I think that we have bonded over. And so for everyone who's watching, part of the impetus for this course on music for well-being that we're getting into is the idea that we know students are struggling emotionally. We know that there are many students who struggle with belonging and emotional regulation, and teachers are recognizing these signs at an increased rate, and it's also manifesting as aggression. But teachers can feel really challenged not knowing how to respond to students appropriately, not knowing how to manage students' behavior and emotional dysregulation. So being able to support students by supporting teachers is part of our mission. And now what we really care about is making sure that teachers have the tools that they need to support their students through music. And so for whatever subject you teach as you're joining us, we want this to be processed through your lens, which is also why we want you to ask questions so that we can really be of assistance, because we all support the student population. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity for us to grow into this sometimes scary but vulnerable position of being authentic and being curious and open-minded and thinking about how music makes us feel, and then being willing to continue to feel that and share that with our students. And in case it wasn't said, my name is Giuliana, and I am the Director of Education and Equity at Music Workshop, and my role is in facilitating the development of our professional development, which means that I get to work closely with Coty and with Sarah and with the rest of the team at Music Workshop. Shout out to the team. And part of what makes my job so amazing, my dream job, is that I get to support students and teachers at the same time by being able to talk about some of these principles. So we're going to get into that now. And I want you to think about, as we're talking about these terms, what does this mean in the context of your own classroom? I'm going to go through a few slides and then we're going to talk about it. And is this new information or is it not? If you want, I would love to see in the chat what subjects you teach. And if it's music, what ensembles or grade levels do you teach? And if you're not a music teacher, what grade levels and subjects do you teach, so that we can see who we have with us today? All right. So in the professional development course that we're talking about, what we are doing today is taking a piece out of it. You can see in Unit 1 and Unit 2, well-being in music and student well-being. So we're going to be talking about some of these fundamental concepts so that we can really start to have a language around what is well-being and what does it look like? How do we identify ways to increase our students' well-being while we're in the class with them, and then while they go home and use music in their own life? So let's start with the definition. According to the World Health Organization, well-being is a positive state experienced by individuals and societies, encompassing quality of life and the ability to contribute to the world with a sense of meaning and purpose. Like health, it is a resource for daily life and is determined by social, economic, and environmental conditions. So this is not an endpoint, it's a process. It's a resource, and it is cultivated in many ways throughout our life. And if you think about how long students are in our schools, given the ratio of time they have in a given week, we spend a lot of students' time with them. And that gives us the opportunity to be able to watch them grow and develop over time, as well as to watch signs of well-being or the lack of well-being. And this is a concept that was really streamlined by Dr. Martin Seligman, who came up with what we're going to talk about in a second, which is the PERMA model of well-being. He is a positive psychologist, and in the course we talk about the idea of positive psychology coming from a realization that the discipline of psychology research was largely determined for a long time by researching unhappiness. What makes us miserable, what makes us depressed, what makes us unhappy, and instead realizing that there's an opportunity to look at what makes us thrive, that we don't have to just try to be okay, that we can strive to be well, we can strive to exceed our expectations, and ultimately well-being is to thrive. So it was an interesting learning curve for me as well, going into this discipline, coming from the music education side, and realizing that even in psychology, they had to reckon with what felt like a giant gap in their research, that they had been focused on misery for so long. And we can imagine that if that was the case for the discipline of psychology, what does it look like in education as well? And so what we want here is to really look at what students are capable of, and that learning benchmarks are not the only element that we can assess in our students as we spend time with them throughout the year. And what that is PERMA. So here's the model that we use to talk about how to understand well-being. It starts with positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning, and achievement. Under each of these are examples of what that might look like in students. And I want you to take a second and read through some of these elements. For example, positive emotions. You might notice that a student is expressing gratitude, or maybe they're just relaxed and they seem at peace. If a student is engaged, they're going to seem like they're in a state of flow, which is kind of like losing your sense of time and being so focused that you might forget that you have to go to the bathroom, or that you're thirsty, or that you've been in this task for 45 minutes and you haven't looked up. That level of engagement and flow is what we aspire to as teachers, where we really know that the student understands what their task is and they're enjoying the activity. That also leads into relationships. We want to make sure that our students feel belonging and are socially engaged with others in their class and on the playground or outside during lunch. Meaning is also incredibly important. That could be meaning about life at large. It could be meaning, how they find meaning in the subject that you teach, or in the ways in which you activate your students into learning in the classroom. So are they asking questions? Are they interested in learning more? Are they showing understanding? Are they expressing creativity? These are signs of meaning that can really help us see that not only are students understanding the material, but they're also in a general state of well-being. And then lastly, we have achievement. And this is a tricky one for some music teachers, because what we really encourage is for our music educators to think about what do you assume achievement looks like? And have you asked your students whether that's how they measure their own success? Because performances can feel like the benchmark for achievement, but we do have some students who walk away and don't feel proud of themselves and actually feel sad about the event. Meanwhile, when we're in class, maybe it's the small achievements musically or in their section that really helps them feel like they are succeeding with their instrument. So I think in any subject, these 5 facets of well-being can be identified in our students and heightened. And so what we can do to encourage students is agency. And Coty, I want you to talk a minute about what the importance of student agency is in your experience in cultivating well-being. And for anyone else that is looking on, you can also look at some of the examples in how PERMA is cultivated and encouraged by teachers in the classroom.
Well, there was a moment when, in talking about, engagement and what it's like to have, students who consistently want to walk out of the classroom or they're so engaged and present in the lesson that, you know, they forget all about the bell. Well, it also works on another perspective too. I know what it's like. I think all of us can speak to. This is a safe place, where you have a class where from the minute it starts, you're like, man, this is going to be a long 45 minutes. This is going to be a long 50 minutes. And to find one's groove can look like that moment when I'm so engaged and I'm present in the lesson, But you know what also can happen in that? I've also had the honor of mentoring some educators where they're so engaged, the teacher is so engaged with the topic that they're not reading the room. And what looks like misbehavior is just, no, you've just been working on the same topic for 30 minutes in front of 12-year-olds. This is not that the song or the topic is not interesting. It's just that in the process of enjoying the moment, you love teaching. You didn't read the room of what the adolescent child needs. That's not your fault. That's just how you have to respond. So the power of student agency is this agreement, whether literally written or spoken as part of routine, of how does one express their emotions? How do I know, how can I check in that you are present in the room? How do I facilitate the fact that our students are building relationships amongst each other, let alone with me, and that they know that those relationships are different? I work in an institution that is in a more liberal part of the country and has more casual connections with students and teachers in the form of names. I'm a Southern girl, and from the moment I graduated from undergrad, I was Miss Morris. I thought it was so weird when I was a camp counselor. Like, I'm not gonna have people call me Miss. And the first time I walked into a classroom, I was like, absolutely not. I am Miss Morris. And now I live in a place where people call their professors by first name. Well, that's the vernacular here, but that's the vernacular. And friends, I tried for 2 years, but the following is not a secret. I announced it in our faculty meeting last year. I began the process of transitioning to a middle ground of Professor Coty. The relationships that I have with students say that I might show up in like a superhero suit one day. I might just be dressed as Wonder Woman. And yes, I am still Professor Morris because this is the boundary that I have. And I want my students from me to know that that's the name that reminds them what my responsibility is in their life. And they will go to another teacher's class and call them Billy. And that's the relationship they build with that person. And in a world where social media gives the illusion that we have access to everything in everyone's lives, we must practice. We must practice establishing different relationships with different people and coming to an agreement. And one of the agreements that I came with my students is I will meet you halfway with Professor Coty, or we can have nicknames. Well, I have a series of cool nicknames, and that includes DJ Prof and Queen. And when people hear around the campus, DJ Prof, I want to know that person, there's now a whole culture that people want to be involved with because we have those kind of conversations in our classroom. So whether it's in the nicknames that you have in the class, the names that you go by, how we can check in with thumbs in, thumbs down, or through sticky note systems, how we have conversations about poetry or text or language or assignments that maybe things that we need to sit with for a while, how we celebrate each other is something that we need to have our students participate in the conversation so that it can be something that we all agree, not just agree upon for the sake that everyone is right. That's not the point. That we can practice coming to conclusions that allow the entire room and the community to move forward and upward at the same time.
And would you say that that has helped your efficacy or success in teaching these students? Do they pay attention more? Do they follow directions more? Do they learn the material better or faster?
Absolutely. I actually had conversations in the different institutions that I've been in. There's always been a moment where at the rate that I move and make those changes with my ensemble, there is another peer of concern who's saying, well, they're just not used to moving that fast, or don't be hard on them, with this. And I'm like, wait a minute, I'm not mad. And that's something I also have to practice with my students. I'd say this, I will give a list of expectations. Oh, I have to back up. Boop, 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 boop. So one of the names that my students call me is Queen. I used to go by Mama Morris. There are some students who do look at us as paternal figures. But that's just not a narrative of me. That's a narrative of a lot of us in our classrooms, that sometimes we are the most concrete parent figure that our students will have. Well, sometimes those names can be dangerous grounds, because for some of our young people, for some of the students we have, to be a parent, to be a child means that they can go to perceived helplessness. Oh, my parent will just fix this thing for me and that may speak to a relationship they have outside of their classroom. That may speak to the absence of a relationship. It may just speak to the joy they have in their hearts. But clarifying what my role is in their lives, along with my responsibility to them, reminds them, like, if my responsibility in their life is to make sure that their grades get turned in on time, that means they have to turn their homework in time in respect of that. It's the mutual respect back and forth. So in the shifting of nicknames from Mama Morris to Queen, what I have noticed is when I go in spaces, I was just in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and when I walk in front of 180 middle schoolers and tell them that I'm Queen, and I adjust my crown, which is my fro. So I'm doing culturally relevant teaching by addressing that my hair texture is different than theirs. We don't go around just touching people's hair, but isn't it a wonderful fro? And isn't your hair lovely? It's lovely straight, and your hair is lovely and curly, and my skin is melanated, and you look like a beautiful doll. And all in those little quips, I make those connections and celebrate what makes us the same and our differences. When I introduce myself as Queen, what also happens is then I say, I don't teach peasants. I only work with royalty. And there's about 3 or 4 things that happen everywhere I go when I do that. When I say that, there's a group of kids that sit tall. I'm a queen, I'm a king, I'm a royal member, like the teacher. And there's also a kid who jokes around somewhere. There's someone who jokes around. And when I say that, they get up and walk away. They do the same thing when I say, I don't teach ugly people. I only teach pretty people. There's always someone who jokingly walks away, but it's not a joke. It's a subconscious reflection of who they think they are. So then I stop and I address it like a discipline action. I say, where are you going? I said, I only teach pretty people. Sit down, pretty, sit down. I will bully you into loving yourself. Sit down. Are there royalty in this room? Well, when I address the room as royalty, when I address the room as beautiful people, they practice exuding that beauty. They practice what royal people do. Royal people in our court are not going to judge each other for mistakes. We don't do that. When we make a mistake, we turn to our peer, we give them a correction. We practice giving corrections, which also means we have to practice receiving feedback. And what does that vocabulary look like in the room? And so thus, whether it's in our celebration of each other and we're saying, hey, I'm doing this and hey, I'm doing that, or I'm really struggling with this, royal people respond in that room. The culture that started as get to know you now impacts the way they sight read the music. It impacts the way that they organize themselves. Hey, royal people have organized backpacks. Let's get to it. Let me help you find a system that elevates you and all the beautiful colors in your brain, the way you navigate and the things that you enjoy, so that you can play well with the team, right? But you got to be a solid team member. So let's figure out the ways that you can amplify that strength. Did I answer the thing?
Yeah, and I think what I want to do is bring it back to PERMA real quick, because what I'm hearing from you is identifying signs in the students that some of them immediately respond with positive emotions and they puff up and they're like, yeah, I'm royalty, you got it. And then others might not find either meaning in that role playing or in that level of joking and engagement and disconnect. And so you're identifying that and responding to that by saying, okay, I really need you to find meaning here. So let me remind you that you are awesome, you are royal, you are deserving of this community, and you belong with us. So I think for the teachers that are watching, what I'm hearing you say is that you have found a way to identify some of the challenges that your students might face in the moment. Mm-hmm. And then based on that facet of PERMA, because this is really a tool sort of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where you can assess in the moment what is happening either to a group of students or an individual student, and then targeting that lack of engagement, or maybe that lack of meaning, or they don't feel like their relationships with other members of the choir or their classmates are strong. And so how do you bridge that divide by engaging that one part of well-being to reignite their interest in learning and getting them back and focused?
Absolutely. When I think about a particular campus that I was at in Texas, where I had a student, this is in the pandemic, and it's so hard to read students' body languages with masks on. And so I had a particular student that I had assumed was not being engaged in the class. But because of these practices of PERMA, the knowledge that I have of Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, I also knew the habit of, if I judge this student on this one thing, I'll lose them forever. So my goal was to find something achievement. I was looking for something to celebrate. And as Giuliana said, as high performing people, if you are in a sport or if you are a competitive person in the arts, achievement looks like a trophy in April of May. But achievement can take different forms. And when I give my students a goal sheet, I used to do it out loud as a class, but now I do individual goal sheets. For some of my students, when I look at their track record with their transcripts and classes they came from, some people say, this year I will make the all-state choir. Some students say, this year I will get to class more on time than I did before. This year I will remember my supplies. So with that mindset, I'm looking for something to celebrate out of Amy. I'm just gonna make up a name, right? I'm looking at Amy in the room. Amy has a mask on. They look like a little, they look really upset. That's what they look like with the mask, but I can't assume. So I'm waiting for a moment. The moment comes, we get to the top of the song, and Amy sits up tall with their binder, and I scream, yes! Everybody look at Amy. Amy sitting up tall, the binder's high, blah, blah, blah. And in my Rolodex of responses, what I expect to get, what I predicted was solid win, because on average that's what would happen, was that like I caught them in a moment of celebration. But to my surprise friends, this young Amy would start crying, and I'm going through my Rolodex of, oh no, I don't know what's going on with this one. So I send the student to my office. I turn to their peers and I say, clearly something's going on with Amy right now, and friends, it's none of your business. It's none of our business. I'm going to go work with our friends, finish this assignment, relationships and engagement. I had a system for class to continue going while I addressed an emergency without worrying about any other outside forces. Everything was going to be fine. So I go back to the student, and the student would share some very dark thoughts that they were having in their lives, that they did not really feel like they wanted to be on this planet anymore. And that broke my heart. The tears from that student came from the first person who even said their name that day. No other teacher had said their name because they had just kind of phoned it in the mask, but they were hurting in real time in class. And what they needed was just someone to greet them so that mask, that shield they had on, could drop. That would turn out to be one of my strongest students in that program, who would go off to study engineering in Kansas. So wow. That's, you know, I don't say that to be the teddy bear like testimony story. It's just what happens when we just take the time to find something to celebrate, because several students in the room did need to sit up tall, just like that student, and they were shining even when they were hurting. And we have the tools and the conversations throughout Music Workshop and other resources to recognize those things through this model.
That's a powerful example. Let's talk through the next few slides real quick so that we can get to some questions, because I can feel more powerful examples coming. So one of the reasons why we're talking about these issues is related to what you just told us about your student, and that is some of the statistics about student mental health. So the American Academy of Pediatrics tell us that children's mental health is a national emergency. Adverse childhood experiences are the single greatest unaddressed public health threat facing our nation today. Suicide attempts among adolescent girls increased 51% during the pandemic, and trauma faced at this developmental stage can continue to affect children across their lifespan. And we know this because trauma can live in the body and the mind and continue to affect it as any person ages and develops throughout adulthood. And when we talk about adverse childhood experiences, many of our students are probably going to have at least one of these types of experiences. That includes abuse, neglect, and household challenges like divorce. And these are precursors to trauma. Some of these experiences are traumatic. And the reason they're called adverse childhood experiences is because when they do happen in childhood, there is a notable effect on child development that affects their learning, their social functioning, their development, and their ability to integrate into society in a healthy way. And the same can be said about stress. And when we think about what it is that we're expecting of our students, we want to be mindful that there are different types and levels of stress, starting with positive stress. And that could be something like putting on a really exciting birthday party. It's exciting, but it's also stressful. Tolerable stress might be a final exam coming up and you are really stressed out, you're anxious, you feel like there's a lot at stake, but at the same time, you know that you're going to be okay. When we get to toxic stress, that's where we're in the COVID lockdown zone of stress, where it's prolonged, it's a full response in your body to stress, and it particularly happens in the absence of protective relationships, which is where teachers can come in and be really helpful in showing support for students and in being role models around understanding what well-being is and how we can take care of ourselves and self-regulate ourselves emotionally. So when we talk about music, then what comes to mind are some of the areas of research in music perception, cognition, and education that show us that music enhances so many parts of the way in which we exist. And I would encourage you to take a moment to think about your own middle school experience. And I say middle school because it's usually the most agonizing experience for most adults that I talk to. Because, you know, hormones are weird and people our age with their hormone imbalances are weird. It's just a really weird time. So what was it that music did for you at that age? Were you listening to a lot of music? Did you have a lot of control over your musical choices? Did you have headphones that you could plug right in and have your own world at your fingertips? These are some of the things that can really support our students, whether it's elementary through high school level, no matter what grade we teach, no matter what subject we teach. If we understand that music enhances these concepts, then we can apply music for the benefit of our students' well-being. And here is a quick list of some of the more technical concepts that music can support. So one of the things that jumps out to me all the time are the autonomic nervous system. So if we think of our nervous system and we think about being anxious or excited or having strong emotions, which we know that children can have a lot, this is something that music also elicits in us. So if we can think of ways to incorporate music listening into our teaching, these are opportunities for us to help teach students how to apply music to counteract some of those challenges that they're facing that affect their nervous system, as an example. So to kind of summarize the student well-being piece and the importance of why we talk about well-being and PERMA, we want to think about the role of student choice and agency in the classroom. That might mean students help pick the pieces that they choose to play in a music class. It might mean they help choose the music that is on the background of reading time during class. But allowing for that choice and agency is a really powerful step into building their relationship with music, their ability to exert control over something in their life that helps breed well-being in them. And then it also shows that their interests are valid and valuable. This can be done especially through music listening and discovering new music. And we're going through this with the hope that you think about what is the role of music listening in your teaching and in your life personally, so that you can start to blend those and really speak from experience. There are 3 areas that music listening can support in particular. Open-earedness, which is the idea that someone becomes open-minded to unfamiliar music. Cultural omnivorousness, which I know is a mouthful, but stick with me for a sec. If you think about an omnivore, they consume anything. Green leafy plants as well as meat. So a cultural omnivore, as in terms of a music listener, is someone who's going to be not just open-minded to new music, but actively seek out new music. And then lastly, social surrogacy. So this is where music is a friend. It's someone that's there for you in the absence of an actual person. And these are 3 areas in which, if you're able to apply music listening in your classroom or as homework for your students, or even talk about the role of music in your life. These are areas that you can see students developing open-earedness, cultural omnivorousness, and social surrogacy. Oh my goodness, what tongue twisters. And that really does support their well-being in the classroom as well as outside of the classroom. All right, so we want to get to some questions. The last thing we're going to give you here before we answer any, so make sure that you're popping your questions into the chat so that Coty and I can have more of a discussion. We are giving you an activity to do with your students. This can be done by any teacher of any subject and most grades. I think for the younger ones, this might need a bit of adjusting to hold their hands a little bit more in answering them, but it's a playlist activity. And you can start with yourself. You can share your own playlist that you create with your students so they can learn about you and get to know you. And then you can also have your students fill it out. We do say that for the most part, you can tell them that it'll be kept to yourself and that you won't share it with the class. Another opportunity is to create a playlist of the class where song selections from the students contributes to a full class playlist, especially if you see that there are common songs across students' choices. So Sarah's going to drop this in the chat for people by the end of this webinar so that you can download it and bring it into your own classroom. But the idea is to think about what is the role of well-being in your classroom, and really thinking about PERMA, positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning, and achievement. You can find answers to what those are from your students by getting them to talk about their musical tastes, like in this activity. Once you know more about them, you can activate songs to activate those facets of well-being, to build relationships with your students, to bond over common interests, or to listen to their interests and then become excited that you're learning more about them and that you're enjoying their music taste as well. Coty, what is your role with music listening in your teaching, and what is it that you would like to share as we collect some of the questions?
So when in my younger teaching, and anytime you hear me say that, I'm not referring to age, I'm referring to experience. I'm referring to the test driving the engagement of different things, because I'm a young teacher at every campus that I'm at. I'm a brand new teacher every time I step onto someone else's campus and engage with their classes for the first time. In the beginning of my teaching, when I asked students to put on headphones and a playlist and take out their, oh my gosh, what did we call iPhones before?
iPods,
right? They take out their iPods, their Zooms. Remember
their MP3 players.
Their MP3 players. I have specific like snapshot memories in my head of the classes that I did not have the classroom management skills for. But back in the day, I would just say that was my rowdy class. Before I had the classroom management skills for them, here's some alternative assignment. I'm going to step away from music making, and now they're writing about music. They're filling out some packet about music and they're listening. And I was just grateful that the room was quiet. But I also remember that those students knew every word of every song that they had in their head. So there was something about the music on the playlist that was more engaging than what I was teaching. And it wasn't because I was teaching classical music. It was the fact that I was teaching classical music and I hadn't met them first where they were. I hadn't figured out a way to engage them where they were. And what I also knew is I'm looking at them, I'm listening to the songs. I listen to the songs they listen to. And if that's the narrative that they have in their head all day, then that's also influencing some of their behavior, their interactions with relationships. A lot of the music, pop music, and not just pop in style, but pop as in popular, that music is giving them very intense, dramatic reactions to what they should do with a breakup, how they should hyper focus when they fall in love with somebody, what to do when they're mad at them. That's their teacher. So if we're not using music, if we're not using art to engage them, then we're letting outside influences shape their character when we have the opportunity to use that same tool for ourselves. So let's fast forward. My engagement with music turned into using the school laptop and the school music account to let my students make a playlist. I've done this. Now we have this awesome worksheet that I will be using here at the college level, but I've allowed my students to get on the YouTube channel, and sometimes they would email me a link. Sometimes they get the same questions in a Google form format, or sometimes they knew I had certain classes that had permission, or I would use a student leader that every morning when they would help me with attendance, people would go to them and say, oh, will you add this song to our class playlist? Cuss words or not, I can find the clean version. But my first step is I need to figure out what they're listening to. And then as a music teacher, I would then use those songs to be part of our ear training, our morning warm-ups. So we're moving and we're engaging the body with that playlist. We're using it and I'm hitting play and I'm saying, where's do? Where's the first note? And sometimes my students would always, if you're a musician and you're here, sometimes I would play a song and they would sing the sixth. They would sing the third down from Tonic from Home, because most hip hop and a lot of popular country are in minor keys. So they are gravitating to what has been home in their ear pods the whole time. And then I just teach from what they know. Actually, blah, 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 blah. And they're like, oh, when we use their music as part of our lessons, then suddenly the lesson is happening even when they're at the homecoming dance. The math is still clicking in their heads while they're just casually in the car on a road trip with their parents. This music can also be, of course, the music for our listening and our reading. And then I have them take it and make their own compositions. And the college students that have all walked in to do their vocal auditions this week, well, the first thing I asked them was, when you're not listening to classical music, what are 3 songs that are on your playlist? And they all shared songs, and to their surprise, they will walk into their boot camp tomorrow and the playlist will be music that they shared with me. Immediately, they will know that I was paying attention. That's it. That's my higher objective tomorrow, that you came in early to school to have all this pressure and all these auditions, and I want them to walk in the door and know that I paid attention. That's the hook.
That's great. And that's where agency comes in.
Thank you so much for that. I joked with Giuliana that I was going to play my music workshop kazoo in our final few minutes, just to make sure that we get to a couple of Q&As. So let's just take 5 minutes here. We have 3 questions. I'm hoping we can get to the first 2. Actually, the first one that's here is actually a burning question of mine too. We have an attendee who asks, any advice on how to get students to accept differing musical tastes in other students? So maybe a little bit of a diplomacy question there, a little bit of respect, communication.
Yeah. I mean, it starts at the beginning of the school year. I will say that. That's part of the open-earedness piece, which is like, if you can have conversations about what does respect mean in your classroom and what are examples of how people express themselves and their identity, then we can have conversations about it's okay to disagree with people, but how do you show that? And if someone showed it the way you did about your choices, would that feel good for you? If not, what changes can we make to our behavior? But I think, yeah.
It seems also to me that, you know, teachers can really be a role model in this as well. Because I know that speaking of younger or less experience, you know, as a teacher, I know that certain times students would share their musical interests with me. And often I would be so quick to react or respond based on how I feel about that music, and not realizing the power that I had as a teacher to kind of shut them down, you know. So I think us as role models really can really do a lot. We have time for just one more question here. Coty, it says, this attendee says, Coty mentioned a couple of activities like sticky note check-ins and goal setting worksheets. Could you elaborate a little on those, on how those work and how they empower student agency?
So with the, I'll go with the sticky note one. There was a semester in my life where I was a theater teacher because I was a December graduate from my undergrad, and a principal approached me and said, well, our middle school teacher, theater teacher, moved up to the high school. You're fun. You're fun. You can teach theater. And I tell my students all the time, did you know that your personality apparently gives you a certification? That's sarcasm. So in that time of being a theater teacher, I learned a lot of games. And what I loved about that experience, and what I also love about all the multiple resources for Music Workshop, is that teaching theater revealed to me what the theater kid needs to learn. The choir kid needs to learn how to be in a team. The theater kid needs to learn autonomy on their body and like what it's like to like take up space and to step into a personality. So it was actually in that window that I learned these sticky note assessments, that I'm going to start with using the sticky note as a way to be an affirmation for someone in the class. Hey, we're at the end of our rehearsal today. I could do it with this music workshop. Hey, we've had a wonderful 1 hour together. Write a sticky note. Take your sticky note, don't put your name on it, and write a question that you have from today's workshop and stick it on the board. That's the exit ticket. You could have them write their name, and that way you could check off who turned it in. So I would have sticky notes on the chairs, or would have some sort of system where they would grab the sticky note, and we're going to have that be where you leave a question. What's something that went well today in class? What was your favorite thing we covered in class? Put it in, boom. These can be exit tickets. These can be quick check-ins. You can have section leaders or classroom leaders use these things. And I also use them as celebrations. You know, Giuliana, you made a wonderful PowerPoint today. Don't we just love Giuliana? Don't we love how great Giuliana's hair looks? We love the leadership. When she spoke with clarity. She gave us an outline. Let's have a celebration of Giuliana at the end of the class. Can you write something nice about Giuliana? And so we can celebrate her and put it on the wall. And I make them, and that's when I'm like, write your name on it, put your name on the back of it. And then there's this question when people say, well, what if someone writes something mean? What do you do if someone writes something? Well, the world is going to say mean things to our students all the time. I don't say that to be an excuse. I say that we can't shy away from opportunities that invite our students to step up to a bar. And if they don't step up to it, I will reiterate this bar and practice the skills that are going to get us here. Yesterday, I asked us to say nice things about Giuliana, and I gave you examples, and some of us did not use that as an opportunity to be leaders. So let's remind ourselves what the expectation is of this class. I've done that elementary through college, and often it's not about Giuliana. Often that was someone articulating an insecurity they had about themselves, displaced on Giuliana, which is also something that I would say out loud. This doesn't make sense. I already told you that she was great. And that solves a lot of things at the same time. That makes sure that the imposter syndrome in my pretend student, Giuliana, I don't want that imposter syndrome to build. I also want to correct the behavior, but I can do it without losing my cool. Because I like to say, I tell my students, repeat after me, Professor Morris loves me. She loves me enough to tell me the truth. And where there is kindness, there must also be honesty, and vice versa. If you are honest without kindness, that is cruelty. But to be kind without honesty is manipulation. And some people are using manipulation tactics in order to keep people engaged in classes, or they want to call themselves coaches because they just got to the point. We do a dance between the two. And whether it be the sticky notes, whether it be the wellness bank, whether it be sending in affirmations through different avenues, we want to practice that dance because that's the dance we want them to live in their own lives with their coworkers.
See, everybody, that's what I was talking about with this soulful wisdom that we were going to get from Coty Raven Morris and from Dr. Giuliana Conti today. I feel like that's a perfect place for us to stop right there on that message. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. I know as teachers, you're so busy, and to even spend an hour, especially after you probably taught all day, it just means the world to us that you're here to support. We hope that you got a lot out of this. I want to direct everyone now to the chat, please, for just a moment. I dropped a link in there to the survey. Please go fill that out. It should only take a couple minutes. We do want to get your name and email address so that we can send you your certificate of completion for this 1 hour course today. I also dropped a PDF that was the playlist of you that Giuliana went over a few slides ago. We've got a couple little questions here.
Yes, you will be able to get that last quote.
Oh,
this whole thing is going to be recorded and we are going to send it out. So you can fast forward right to the end where she dropped that wisdom I can't even repeat right now.
In fact, we'll probably find it and type it out and put it on social media just because it's such a good nugget to end on. We did have one more question from an attendee. Someone asked about specific ideas for connecting with extra large classes. So if that was you and we haven't gotten to that, I encourage you to put that in the survey and we'll be sure to get back to you. I'll have Dr. Conti and Coty Raven Morris get back to you with that answer. If you had another question at all that either we ran out of time for or you just didn't quite get it put into the Q&A, put it in the survey and we will email you. We'll get back to you
But a really quick answer for that person really quick is that class can't stay big. And I don't mean changing the class. You need to make systems in which that class never has to stay in that size. Even if it's a lecture hall class, you got chairs fixed to the ground. You got to utilize that space so that when you're teaching them, they never fully stay as one unit. That's somehow there's parts of your class where suddenly they're in 4 groups, they're in 3 groups. And just like my choir roster, all of my choir roster has soprano, alto, tenor, bass, but it also has S1, S2, A1, A2. It also has 1, 2, 3. So they have varying groups and they know what those groups are. And then eventually when I can say, go to your purple squad, go to this squad, go to da 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 da, then I can engage with them in different ways. That's a very fast version of that answer.
Wonderful. Fewer emails for us to send now, but if you
that's
do
what I was trying to do.
If you do have these burning questions, Sarah and I have our contact information right there for you. And then I also want to show you that we've got a special discount for anyone who is really interested in these topics and would like to learn more. The professional development course is available for general educators as well as music educators. We made sure to really target the information for these different populations of specialists so that you can feel like it matches your needs and subject and grade levels. And that discount code is Soundboard, and it's a $50 off coupon. And we will send that information out after this workshop as well, so you can share it with your colleagues and create a language, a shared language on your campus around student well-being.
Thanks so much again for being here. We'll let you go. I hope you're having a great school year so far. Again, contact us if you need support with anything. We're here to help, and we really appreciate you. Have a great evening.
Thanks everyone for joining. Thank you, Coty Raven Morris, the amazing queen, for being with us.
Get out of here. Bye, y'all.
Bye.